You know what's strange? Some of the most gifted people I know are also some of the most stuck. Not because they lack talent, not because they lack intelligence, not because God forgot to give them opportunities. They're stuck because they're afraid. And honestly, most of them don't even realize what they're actually afraid of. Maybe that's you. Maybe there's a dream you haven't touched in years, a business idea, a ministry, a book, a calling, a conversation you know you need to have. A step of faith God keeps bringing back to your heart, and every time you think about taking that step, something happens. Your chest tightens, your mind starts racing. A flood of questions rushes in. What if I fail? What if people laugh? What if I embarrass myself? What if I put everything into this and it falls apart? What if I disappoint everyone? And before you know it, you're back where you started. Thinking, planning, researching, preparing, waiting, always waiting. Waiting for confidence, waiting for certainty, waiting for the perfect time. But here's what I've learned. Sometimes what we call wisdom is actually fear wearing a disguise. And that's hard to admit, because fear rarely introduces itself as fear. It shows up sounding reasonable, responsible, practical. It tells you to wait a little longer, learn a little more, prepare a little more, get everything perfect first. And before you know it, months become years. Dreams become memories, potential becomes regret, and the thing God placed in your heart never gets a chance to breathe. But here's the strange part. I don't think most people are actually afraid of failure. I think they're afraid of what failure might mean about them. Think about that for a second, because failing at something hurts. Nobody enjoys it. Nobody enjoys watching something they care about fall apart. But the deeper fear, the one hiding underneath all the others, it's the fear that if the project fails, maybe you're a failure. If the relationship ends, maybe you're unlovable. If the business struggles, maybe you're not capable. If the ministry doesn't grow, maybe God never called you. That's the real lie. The lie that failure is not something that happens. The lie that failure is who you are. And that lie doesn't come from God. Not even close. The enemy has always attacked identity. Always. Go back to the Garden of Eden. The serpent didn't start by attacking behavior. He attacked identity. He planted doubt. Did God really say? That strategy hasn't changed. The enemy still whispers the same kinds of lies. You're not enough. You're not qualified. You're not ready. You're going to fail. Everyone will find out you're a fraud. And if you listen long enough, those whispers start sounding like your own thoughts. That's what makes them dangerous. Because now you're not just hearing the lie, you're believing it. And once you believe it, fear becomes a prison. You stop taking risks. You stop stepping out. You stay safe. You stay comfortable. You stay in the boat. And maybe that's exactly what the enemy wants. Because if he can convince you that your worth depends on your performance, he never has to stop you. You'll stop yourself. You'll bury the dream before it ever gets started. You'll disqualify yourself before God ever would. And honestly, that's heartbreaking, because there are books that never get written because of fear. Businesses that never get started because of fear. Ministries that never launch because of fear. Relationships that never heal because of fear. Lives that never fully become what God intended because fear convinced people to stay small. But here's what fear never tells you. The people you admire most have failed a lot. Think about Abraham. Failed. Moses failed. David failed. Peter failed. Actually, Peter's story always gets me. Imagine promising Jesus you'll never leave him, never deny him, never abandon him, and then doing exactly that 3 times. Can you imagine the shame, the regret, the replaying of every moment afterward, the crushing feeling that you've ruined everything? Yet Jesus never defined Peter by his worst moment. Thank God for that. Because if God defined us by our worst moments, none of us would have a future, not one. Instead, Jesus restored him, called him forward, used him, built upon him. That's grace. And honestly, I think many believers understand grace for sin, but struggle to understand grace for failure. They believe God forgives mistakes, but they secretly wonder if He can still use them afterward. So they carry shame, they carry regret, they carry old failures like labels attached to their names. But shame says, I am the mistake. Grace says, I made a mistake, but God is still writing my story. Big difference, huge difference, because one keeps you trapped, the other sets you free. You know what I find interesting? The enemy spends so much time trying to make believers feel disqualified because he knows something. A believer who knows their identity in Christ is dangerous. Not because they're perfect, not because they never fail, because they stop being controlled by fear. They stop living for approval. They stop measuring their worth by outcomes. They stop asking, what if I fail? And start asking, what if I obey? That changes everything, because obedience and success are not the same thing. The world worships results. God values faithfulness. The world asks, did it work? God asks, did you trust me? The world celebrates outcomes. God celebrates obedience. And honestly, that takes so much pressure off, because now your identity isn't riding on the outcome. Your worth isn't hanging on whether the business succeeds, whether the book sells, whether the ministry grows, whether people approve. You're already loved, already chosen, already accepted. Ephesians tells us God chose us before the foundation of the world, before we succeeded, before we failed, before we got anything right, before we got anything wrong. Think about that. God knew every mistake you would ever make, every failure, every weakness, every regret, and He still chose you. That truth alone destroys the enemy's argument, because if God's love was never based on performance, then failure cannot remove it. And maybe somebody listening needs to hear that today. You are not your worst decision. You are not your biggest regret. You are not the thing that didn't work out. You are not your mistakes. You are not your failures. You belong to Christ. That's who you are. And because of that, fear loses its authority. Not instantly, not magically, but steadily. The more truth fills your heart, the less fear controls your life. Paul tells Timothy something powerful. God has not given us a spirit of fear. Notice he doesn't say fear won't show up. Fear will show up. Fear knocks on everybody's door. The difference is whether fear gets a vote, because courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is moving forward while fear is still talking. It's writing the first page with shaking hands, making the call before you feel ready, starting the business before everything is figured out, taking the step while uncertainty still exists. That's courage, and that's faith, because faith is not certainty. Faith is trust. Trust that God is bigger than your mistakes. Trust that God is bigger than your failures. Trust that even if you fall, He can lift you again. Proverbs says the righteous fall 7 times and rise again. Notice it doesn't say they never fall, it says they get back up. That's the difference. God's people aren't defined by falling, they're defined by rising again and again and again, because God is faithful. So maybe the next time fear starts whispering to you, stop listening passively. Talk back. Seriously. When fear says you're not enough, answer with truth. When fear says you're disqualified, answer with truth. When fear says you're a failure, answer with truth. Because lies lose power when exposed to truth. And the truth is this: your identity is not up for grabs. It was secured by Jesus, purchased at the cross, sealed by grace, and protected by God Himself. Failure is something that may happen along the journey, but it is not who you are. So write the first page, start the project, launch the ministry, have the conversation, take the step. Not because success is guaranteed, but because obedience is worth it. And because God has never asked you to be fearless, He simply asked you to trust Him. Before we finish, I want to share something personal. If this message connected with you, If you've been wrestling with fear, anxiety, disappointment, self-doubt, or emotions you've struggled to understand, I want to give you a free copy of my book, Faith and Feelings. Because one of the biggest challenges many believers face isn't a lack of faith, it's not knowing what to do with their emotions. Fear, worry, shame, grief, disappointment, doubt. This book will help you navigate those emotions through the lens of God's truth and develop a deeper, healthier walk with Him. You can grab your free copy using the link in the description below. And if this message encouraged you, make sure you subscribe, share it with someone who needs it, and remember, the enemy wants you to believe failure is your identity. God says you are His child. One of those voices leads to fear, the other leads to freedom. Choose carefully which one you listen to.